Thanks, man. I've chatted too much.
Is that your glass or spares? Morning.
Have you asked me the direct question? Yeah. We can get the answer.
and to, it's gone up a bit, and to have an initial discussion on the planning obligations and the conditions. Any other procedural, administrative or housekeeping matters? Mr. King.
Yeah, could I just ask the council in which order their witnesses are coming so that we can get the papers correct?
course.
Yes, Mr. Morgan.
I can confirm it's as we said yesterday. Next will be Mr. Burton, dealing with transportation matters. Then Mr. Simmons, dealing with air quality. And then finally, Mr. White, with the planning overview.
Anything else before we continue? Mr. Morgan, please introduce your next witness.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Next witness is, as I have just said, Mr. Burton. And you should have from Mr. Burton, excuse me, his proof of evidence and a summary. And so just to indicate, I'm going to introduce Mr. Burton in a moment in the usual way. I'm going to take everything as read, and given I think the matters on transportation are fairly clear, I'm just going to ask him on 5 points to comment on and clarify the council's position, 5 aspects, which I hope will assist you and the local parties.
Splendid, thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Burton, if we can take up your main proof of evidence, please, on page 3. And we go to your paragraph 1.1. And you give your name there as Ronald Burton, and you state that you are the Senior Transportation Planner.
That's correct.
Thank you. You hold a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, and you are a chartered member of the Institute of Logistics and Transport.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And in terms of your experience, you say you have 43 years of experience in the public sector, comprised of 15 years at the London Borough of Lambeth and 28 years at the London Borough of Croydon, which is, of course, your current employer.
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Thank you. And in terms specifically of your day-to-day task, you say you've been responsible for providing highways and transportation comments and recommendations on numerous commercial and residential development proposals.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Burton, as I indicated, we will take your proof as read, but I'm going to ask you to assist us, if you could please, on 5 particular matters arising from the issues and that you've dealt with in your proof of evidence. Firstly, the access to the sites. Can you just...
Yes, obviously much of this was covered yesterday by Mrs. Balbao from the applicant's transport consultant. Just set out a few key points. The roads surrounding the site are all form part of the Transport for London road network and are therefore the responsibility as Highways Authority of Transport for London, who have raised no objections to the access arrangements to the sites. Both accesses have been safety audited, and the recommendations of those safety audits have been taken on board. In particular, the curb build out on the exit, left-hand side as you exit onto Russell Hill Road from the site, to provide improved visibility between vehicles and pedestrians walking along Russell Hill Road, and some bollards on the junction of the Banstead Road south site exit to protect the swept path of vehicles as they come out and prevent them overrunning the footway, and to prevent vehicles entering the service bay from running over the footway. Russell Hill Road seems to be the access which most people, residents certainly, have an issue with. We are happy that that access is suitable given the restrained parking on the site and the likely traffic generation coming from the site. In the morning peak, relating to the residential element, there would be predicted to be 14 vehicles exiting in the peak hour, which is a very low number, and that is even less in the evening peak hour at 9. It's considered that whilst that is forms part of a busy gyratory close to the signal junction, that opportunities would be afforded for people to exit given the low volumes. As previously mentioned by Mrs. Balbao, the peak use for the church would be a Sunday morning when it's recognised that traffic is lighter around the gyratory, and for that reason we consider that the traffic exiting at the peak hour for the church from the 50 space car park would not cause an issue. Would also mention that there will be a car park management plan associated with the development, and as part of that we would expect for the church that they would provide marshals on the busy times to control the vehicles exiting, to ensure that vehicles aren't idling on site with vehicles switched on, and that should assist in traffic emerging out onto Russell Hill Road. In terms of pedestrian access to the site, all the signalled junctions have red and green man crossings facilities. The footpaths around the site are relatively wide, with capacity to store the pedestrians, and in particular the proposed landscaped area in front of the church on the corner of Russell Hill Road and Brighton Road will provide quite a large holding area for pedestrians who are emerging from the church at the busy times. That's my comments regarding the access.
Could I just ask one matter, please, relating to that? You addressed the issue of vehicles exiting and the concerns of the residents regarding that. You addressed that in your proof, and you've just touched upon that. One specific matter, you have referred in your proof to the accident rate. For the note, you don't need to go to it, paragraph 411, but that was raised yesterday. Is there, in terms of what you've heard, is there anything in the statistics that causes you concern regarding the accident rate?
No, I would not consider them to be a concern. This is a very busy gyratory with very high volumes of traffic, and the accident rate I would consider is not excessive given the way the traffic operates around the system.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Then move on, please, to the second topic, and that is parking. I think we're clear, aren't we, on the parking provision that's proposed, but happy if you want to clarify that and then give your comments.
Yes, as previously stated, there's a total of 37 parking spaces for the residential units and 50 parking spaces for the church, and a car club space on Banstead Road. Mrs. Balbao yesterday made reference to the London Plan standards, where in high P-TAL areas, and this is a P-TAL of 5, car-free development should be promoted, and in areas of good public transport accessibility, significantly less than one space per unit should be provided for residential. I'd also refer you to the Croydon local plan, the current plan, the 2013 plan, which is core document 10.1, in SP 8.15 refers to the council encouraging car-free development in centres where there is high P-TAL. In the Croydon Plan 2006 saved policies, which is CD 10.2, T8, paragraph 932, states that in Croydon Metropolitan Centre and those town and district centres where public transport accessibility is particularly good, which would apply to this site in Purley, the council will encourage low or zero parking provision for residential development, and in such circumstances the owners of such properties are unlikely to be granted on-street residence parking permits. And then in the parking standards in Appendix 2 to that same document, Para 14 encourages low or zero parking provision for residential development where public transport accessibility is particularly good, P-TAL 5 or 6.
Thank you. I think you referred to the policies in your proof of evidence, haven't you?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. So I think then if that completes the residential side. Can you turn please to the church and their requirement?
Yes, the church is providing 50 spaces. From the transport assessment, it does identify that based on current usage of visitors to the church, that there would be an additional 207 spaces required by the church. Surveys have been undertaken of the multi-storey car park and the Russell Hill Place car park, which show that on a peak Sunday morning, when the church is at its busiest, there is more than enough spare capacity to accommodate additional vehicles that would require to visit the church, and parking at those times is actually free, so it wouldn't cost visitors to the church anything to park. I think at other times the church is not so busy as was set out yesterday, and the car park within the site should be adequate on most occasions to accommodate the traffic that visits.
There's was comment yesterday, I don't know whether you need to say anything further, but I'll just give you the opportunity on the reliance on existing parking and redevelopment proposals. Has that been adequately covered?
In what regard?
In terms of the multi-storey car park?
Oh, in terms of it being maintained long
Yes,
term.
yeah.
Yes, I mean there is it is identified in the emerging plan in item 30 and table 11.1 that the site of the current multi-storey car park is a possible proposal site for redevelopment, but included within the proposal for redevelopment is the maintaining of a public car park. Clearly, until development schemes come forward, we will not know what the proposals are, the number of parking spaces to be provided, but it would be part of my job in assessing any application to look at existing usage of the car park, the existing parking requirements within the centre, and ensure that any proposed development did not detract from the current requirements. There are currently no proposals that I'm aware of to redevelop the Russell Hill Place car park, but the same principles would apply.
But that's not an allocated site?
No, that's not an allocated site.
Thank you. Then just the one final matter, I don't know whether you want to say any more on, was going back to residential, any overspill from that, the issue of the controlled parking zone. You heard Ms.
Yes.
Balboa's evidence on that yesterday.
Yes, I mean there is a controlled parking zone around the site which operates from 9 till 5 Monday to Saturday. Residents of the future development would be restricted from applying for parking permits to park within that controlled parking zone. Around the parking zone there's also a buffer zone which extends along roads beyond, for short distances beyond the CPZ, where parking is restricted between 1 and 2 Monday to Friday. This is to discourage commuter parking. So clearly the walking distance for anybody who was a resident of the development would be 5-10 minutes in order to park in any unrestricted parking away from the site. Residents will be moving in, buying these properties, taking up the affordable housing, being fully aware that there is very restricted parking on the site, and would take, I would imagine, would take that into consideration when purchasing the property. The public transport accessibility is very good, and the policy and the aims is to encourage more people to use sustainable transport modes and to discourage people from owning and using private cars.
Thank you. Move from that topic then, please, to the third matter. That is the one of servicing and waste vehicles, and in particular the issue that came up yesterday on the waste vehicles regarding the inspector's comments on the swept path analysis. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that, yes.
Just deal with that for us, please.
Yes, I mean, it's been demonstrated that through the swept path analysis that a refuse vehicle would be able to enter the site from Russell Hill Road, this is the island site, and turn within the site. It does appear, as the inspector said, that there may be close proximity between the vehicle and the building. Personally, I can't think of any examples that I could demonstrate where that has been done before, only to say that it is quite common that a swept path analysis will come up to about 300 millimetres of a building. It's quite common to provide a curb edging strip to better delineate how far the vehicle should go, and I see that as not being an issue in something that could be added in front of the building at the detailed design stage. The vehicle swept path and the refuse collection details, as part of the consultation when the committee report was prepared, did consult the council's waste management team and reference 8.167 in the committee report, paragraph 8.167, which is core document 6.1, on page 52, makes reference to the waste management team having looked at the details and confirming they are happy that they work. So we don't have any issue in regard to the refuse vehicle being able to access and turn on site.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Next matter, please. You touched upon this to some degree, but just give you the chance to make any further comment. Trip generation and traffic congestion.
Yes, I mentioned earlier in the opening point that the residential car trips, because of the restrained parking on the sites, is very low. The 14 vehicles coming out of the Russell Hill road exit on the morning peak, 9 coming out in the evening peak, and the Banstead Road exit for the south site would be 13 vehicles coming out in the morning peak and 8 in the evening peak. The two-way residential trips, this was mentioned yesterday, and I think was confirmed by the Residents Association, that in terms of the overall traffic flows on the surrounding road network, the increase in trips around the network by car would be less than 0.5% increase, which cannot be considered significant as to add to traffic congestion on the surrounding roads. The church peak would be on a Sunday morning for the 11 a.m. service, where we've been told up to 450 people could attend, although there is capacity for 500. But given the constraints of the car park only providing 50 spaces, the actual numbers of vehicles exiting will obviously be limited to that number. It will generate 257 car trips based on the predictions in the transport assessment, but obviously many of those would park in the public car parks and away from the site. So it's not considered an issue.
You just might need to get your voice up. I don't know whether whether it's the microphone or what, but if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Yes.
I think that covers all matters, I think, on trip generation, traffic congestion, does it not?
Yes, it does, yes.
Thank you. And then final matter, please. Again, was touched upon yesterday, the small area of safeguarding, and that's for TfL.
Yes, that's the corner, I think, I may have put in my proof the northeast corner. I think it's probably better the southeast corner, but it's the corner of Russell Hill Road and Brighton Road where the site fronts Russell Hill Road. Transport for London, as has been previously said, have talked for many years about desires to improve the gyratory system. I'm not aware of any proposals that are currently on the table or coming forward, but Transport for London have identified that strip of land as being required for any future improvements. That will better align Russell Hill Road with the section of the gyratory immediately opposite, and probably help with the discharge at those traffic signals. And that piece of land is to be safeguarded as and when TfL require to implement an improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. That was all the matters I wanted to ask you. Does that cover everything you wanted to say at this stage?
Yes, and obviously any questions.
Thank you very much. So that completes the evidence in chief.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you.
Mr. King.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I could start, Mr. Burton, by, on the bits that we do agree with, that might help everybody. I think we agree that the total volume of traffic created from the site, from residential, will make hardly any difference to the traffic on the A23 and the gyratory. I think we agree with that. We support, whether it's southeast or northeast, the safeguarding of that strip of land to straighten that junction. And would you agree that that junction is offset at the moment and it does cause a problem when you get a large HGV, cuts the lanes from 3 to 2 as you cross the junction? That happens at the moment. Would you agree with that?
I've not witnessed it, but the alignment of the junction is such that people will move across a lane in order to realign on the other side of the junction.
Okay. And the other thing that we agree that it has a high PTL of 4, or is it 5?
5,
yes. I think we agree on that. The issues I wanted to ask you is, I think from all the studies Croydon and TfL have done, that the A23 is and its gyratories and junctions are probably the busiest in the London Borough of Croydon.
They're among the busiest, definitely, yes.
Yeah. And Croydon has done a number of studies, and TfL, particularly on the Purley Way, and they've always focused particularly on 2 areas, which is the Five Ways Junction, about 2 miles to the north, and Purley Gyratory.
Yeah.
And you did one, you had one for yourselves, I think it was by Peter Brett in 2009, 2010, which said there was an urgent need to improve the gyratory at Purley and also at Five Ways.
Yes, I'm aware of that report, yes.
Yeah, thank you. And TfL have now produced a scheme for Five Ways, but not for Purley Gyratory. Okay. The issue I think the residents actually have is not that there is additional traffic that will cause problems, but it's where it exits on to Russell Hill. And from my measurements, it's 6 car lengths from the traffic lights, the exit, or 2 HGVs or 1 HGV and 3 cars. And most of the day, there is queuing traffic at those traffic lights in Russell Hill. So therefore, any car trying to exit will have to wait for a space or try and push out into the traffic. Would you agree with that?
They will have to wait if there is a queue to come out. Quite often in queuing traffic, most considerate drivers will actually, if they see a car coming out, stop and let them out. But yes, if people won't let them out, they would have to wait for the lights to change to green and find a gap in the traffic.
Yeah, but my experience of many years of driving around there, if the lights are green, then traffic is less likely to let you out than if they're red, because you're aiming to get across the traffic lights. In the transport consultant's evidence yesterday, if you look at your sweat patterns and the information from TfL, they seem to agree with me that cars coming out will also not only want to be in the outside lane, but will want to get to the middle and the near side lane. They've only got 6 car lengths to do that prior to the lights. And if they try and do it after the lights, before the next set of lights, which again is only a 6 car place, that may prove very difficult to get from the outside lane to the inside lane if you're wanting to go to Godstone Road or back round Purley High Street. Would you agree that that would be a difficult manoeuvre?
I think that's the nature of a gyratory system, that anybody who enters the gyratory and wants to move across to other lanes has to indicate and merge as the traffic is moving. Given the very low volumes of traffic coming out of those accesses, I don't see that to be an issue.
Yeah, well, I think it might be an issue for the people coming out. I accept that during the course of the day, I think it talks about 156 manoeuvres per day. But it is a difficult manoeuvre, and if it's a delivery van or a dust cart, that makes it even more difficult.
Well, I wouldn't say so. I mean, the dust cart obviously will probably have to sweep onto the second lane anyway to turn out, and would have to rely on a gap in the traffic or traffic giving way. But the incidence of service and refuse vehicles visiting the site will be very, very low. They can be programmed to be off-peak so that they do not interfere with the peak flows of the traffic on the gyratory when it would be easier to emerge.
Yeah, but I think you agree with my point that larger vehicles coming out will probably not be able to, because of their sweep, gain the outside lane. They will have to go at least to the centre. And I think our point is that not only will you have residential traffic coming out, you will have delivery traffic, service vehicles coming out as well. And that is not the volume of traffic joining the gyratory, it's where they join and the interruption to the flow in Russell Hill, which is our point.
Well, we've assessed it. Transport for London, who are the highway authority, have assessed it, and we don't consider it to be an issue.
Yeah, I accept that TfL initially said it was an issue. They also said that they wouldn't have keep clear markings, but as I think Mr. Krzyzewski pointed out in a subsequent letter, they failed to comment on it any further.
Yes, I think the comment on the keep clear markings was in scoping, comments on the scoping study. It was a while ago. I'm sure that TfL will consider any option that's put forward to them once the scheme were built, and if it did prove to be an issue, which we don't believe it will, then we could go back again and ask them to reconsider. But as I've said, I don't consider, given the low traffic volumes, you can control delivery times, that it will be an issue as proposed.
Right. And if I move to Banstead Road now, if the exit at one time was proposed to be on Banstead Road, now depending on where you put it, because Banstead Road has the gyratory lights, plus it also has a pedestrian set of lights, would it not be easier to exit onto Banstead Road because you will get two natural breaks in the traffic?
It's obviously not the proposal we're considering, but there would be different types of problems with an exit onto Banstead Road. I've observed whilst
I'm happy for you to leave your answer there.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not the proposal before.
Right, and the next question is about traffic volumes.
Yeah.
TfL and the DFT have done a number of studies now, and most transport reports up until about 2013 assumed a decline in traffic, and particularly in London. But since the report, we've had report 7 to the GLA from TfL and a number of reports from DFT since, that all now show since 2012 traffic in London is on the increase. Would you agree with that?
Those reports are out. They obviously don't apply directly to Purley, so I wouldn't be able to comment as to how relevant those increases are to Purley, but it's a general over London-wide comment. But I think all that highlights is the fact that we need to constrain car use. And one excellent way of constraining car use to reduce congestion and traffic volumes is to provide developments in high public transport accessibility areas to have very low parking provision.
Yeah, I understand the desire and that, but just want to know whether you agree that the stats that DFT talk about is a 1.8% increase across all London. It's 2.2 to 2.5 in Surrey, which is 2 miles down the road. And if you extract it, you end up with about 2 to 2.2% increase in outer London. Would you
I'm not going to disagree with that because you're quoting me statistics from a published document.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And then the other issue is the use of public transport, and in Purley as well, has gone down in the last 2 years, which is a concern to the Mayor and a lot of us. So do you believe your policies will try and reverse that?
Well, obviously, if residents have limited parking provision and are relying on public transport, then it should help to increase the public transport usage. So that's the benefit of the scheme.
Right. The other issue is if you look to see where the main increase in traffic comes from, clearly car ownership has gone up, even though in the last 2 quarters sales of new cars have gone down, but there's more car ownership because older cars are more reliable and stay reliable longer. But the biggest increase is in white van deliveries, where be deliveries from Amazon at one end to pizzas at the other end. And has any of that been taken into consideration? If these people don't have cars, they will increase their deliveries by service vehicles?
Well, servicing facilities are provided for both sites. The applicant, as a condition to the planning permission, if granted, will be required to produce a delivery service plan, which sets out. The applicant will be required to provide a delivery service plan, which will set out how deliveries are to be managed. Larger deliveries can be managed so that they're pre-booked to avoid peak hours, to ensure that the loading bays aren't all required at the same time. And as part of that delivery service plan, we consider that the servicing arrangements for the proposed developments are acceptable.
Yeah, I can understand that in the construction phase and for, if you like, the community sector, which the control will be within the church and one person, but for lots of people who suddenly fancy a pizza or order something online from Amazon or somebody else overnight, you won't have any control over those delivery vans, will you?
Well, you won't, but they tend to be far smaller vehicles. There are service bays provided on both sides of Banstead Road. You've got the service bay within the site off Russell Hill Road. We consider that that would be adequate to cater for the needs of the site.
Right, can I go back to the exit on Russell Hill? Don't dispute the numbers of cars coming out, and in the original transport report it envisaged no more than 5 at any particular time would be the most likely from the residential. Would you agree with that?
I don't recall seeing that figure. The figures I've got are the hourly figures, which in the AM peak is 14, which equates to 1 every 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah, but there's no control over the exact time that people...
Obviously not, no.
But when it comes to the community facilities, you talked about there shouldn't be a problem on Sunday, but it is the aim of the church to use the community facilities to the full during the week where possible. So also during the week you could have 50 cars parked there. And my experience is, and even if you look at this place last night, the majority of people left at the same time. Now some people will stay, but you could have up to 50 cars trying to leave at exactly the same time onto Russell Hill. Now the traffic light sequence, from my measurement, not with a stopwatch but observation, is about 30 to 35 seconds green and about 30 to 35 seconds red. So there's just around a minute to minute 10 seconds in a complete change. So how long do you think it would take those 50 cars to get out into Russell Hill?
Well, I haven't tried to work that out, and I wouldn't like to hazard a guess. All I would say is that the type of uses of a church with big congregations, from my experience, is that when a church service finishes, not everybody runs for the door to get out as quickly as possible as they would at something like a theatre performance or a concert of some sort. People will stay back, talk to one another, maybe have a coffee. Given the proximity to the town centre, some people may decide to go and do a bit of shopping. So I don't believe that all 50 will all be rushing to come out at exactly the same time. There will also be a car park management plan where marshals will be there to actually control the discharge from the car park. If people are held in the car park because there's a queue waiting to come out, then that's not affecting the surrounding road network in that it's not causing congestion on the network. We therefore do not consider that the 50-space car park will be a major issue in terms of all vehicles discharging at exactly the same time.
Yeah, well, I'll come back to that because, again, you quote Sundays and church activities, which you're probably right, but it is the intention to use it for other activities during the week, evenings, and the car park could be full of 50 cars and the majority, let's say 20% stay behind, but if 20% stay behind, that's still 40 trying to leave at the same time.
I think we heard yesterday from the Reverend that most of the activities during the week tend to have far fewer people. They attract people who wouldn't necessarily come by car. So whilst the car park could be used by 50 cars, I don't think that would be a particular issue. Well, I'd imagine if they're having 3 or 4, they've got a number of rooms, there may be 3 or 4 different activities going on at once. There will be a management plan for the centre, and timings of events could be managed such that not everything finishes at exactly the same time. So I think to say that all cars are all going to leave at the same time is not a correct assumption.
Well, I'm not saying that all, I'm saying the majority, because they will come to events and you could have up to 50 parking spaces. Now, they may be taken up by all one event, or they might be taken up by a number of events. Now, I do accept your point that the church could manage those events by staggering the lets, but I'm not sure whether they have that in mind, but that's one way of doing it. But I still think on occasions there will be...
Mr. King, what's your question? I think I understand the point.
Right. My question is, have you taken into consideration 40 to 50 cars leaving at one stage, at one point?
We have considered it and do not consider it to be an issue.
Right, thank you. I think the other thing you clarified today for me, which I said yesterday, there are actually 2 versions of the controlled parking zone, which is one where you have a residence permit and or pay on the meter, and the other one just beyond it where there is a 1 hour parking, and that is around lunchtime, isn't it? 12 to 1, I think, in Purley.
Yes, I did make a note of it. 1 till 2, I think.
It's
yes,
1 till 2. Yeah. But residents could park before that time or after that time.
They could.
And overnight in particular.
They could.
Yeah. The other question, I'm not sure the answer myself, but I will ask it. Everybody has said that the residents of these dwellings will not be allowed a parking permit. You didn't actually say won't be allowed. I think it was more like discouraged.
Well, no, the policy says it's likely they wouldn't be, but for this development, we're actually having a condition that they won't be allowed.
Yeah. There is some question of whether
I think, we're coming on to conditions and the planning obligations in due course. I think it's actually an obligation, isn't it?
It is an
rather than
obligation, so yes.
A condition. Will you be here for that discussion later today?
I hope so.
So hopefully we'll go through it, it'll be explained, And if you have any
Yeah.
questions about it, you can raise them there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just see if I've got anything else. Yeah, can I just come on to the accident rate, if that's okay? I did, looking at the crash survey, which records minor collisions, serious collisions, fatal, but only ones where there is actually an injury. And the 5-year period I took was different to WIG, but they also took a 5-year period. Mine, in the gyratory, starting at Purley Way, Pampersford Road junction to the junction by Tesco's, there was 27 accidents, of which 11 of them were in Russell Hill, and none in Banstead Road on mine. In the WIG survey, it was 41, of which 30 were between the section from Pampersford Road to Brighton Road, Russell Hill. So doesn't that indicate that Russell Hill is more of a problem than Banstead Road?
Well, from the figures you've just quoted me, I think it indicates that the accident situation has improved in the 5 years you've compared to the 5 years that the transport assessment compared. I will agree it does show that there are more accidents in Russell Hill Road than there are in Banstead Road, but that's the nature of the road, where there's more vehicle crossing over to change lanes as they approach the junction, whereas Banstead Road is a free-flowing road in 2-3 lanes. But as I said previously, we don't consider that accident rate to be significantly high and of a great concern for that type of location on the way that road operates.
Yeah, I think, again, we agree that most of the accidents are because in Russell Hill is the one road where people coming from Purley Way need to change from the near side to the outside lane, and people coming around from Foxley Lane need to change from the outside to the near side lane, so you get this cross, whereas Banstead Road is free flowing in one direction. And the statistics show mine 0 accidents in Banstead Road and WIG's 1 accident at the junction of Brighton Road and Banstead Road.
Mr. King, what's your question?
So my question is, wouldn't it not have been better to have put an exit onto Banstead Road?
I think we've heard this before.
Yes, well, I think I answered that earlier. All accesses have their own implications. There would be issues with an access onto Banstead Road.
Mr. King, any other questions?
No, I think that's it. It clarifies that Russell Hill is the problem, not Banstead Road. Thank you. And I think
Thank you for that statement. Any other questions?
Lee
Mr.
had a
Cooper?
couple. Yeah.
Good morning. I just have one very simple question. You've mentioned the car parking management plan. Is this a document that's available now, and will it be legally binding upon the church?
Well, as the inspector said, we'll be talking about conditions later, but it will be something that will be required by condition. So it will.
But it isn't a document we can read at the moment?
There isn't one,
Okay,
as I'm
fine.
aware, that's available at the moment.
But perhaps because it's a question I was going to ask, perhaps you could just outline how you expect that would work.
Yes, it will cover a number of aspects. One is how the church community use would allocate the parking. So we would be expecting them to give preference to people who are less mobile, who cannot necessarily park in one of the neighbouring car parks and walk. People who would car share, so you would encourage people who came together, shared a car, 4 people in a car, would give them priority. Also the control of the car park in terms of how it's discharged. We would be looking for them to provide marshals at busy times who could control vehicles leaving the car park so that it's done in an orderly fashion. They could prevent vehicles from sitting in the car park if there is a delay in coming out, from leaving their engines idling, and tell them to switch their engines off while they're waiting. And it's to manage the car park to make sure it's used to its best in terms of the number of people that can park there, not the number of cars, the number of people. This would limit the requirement for parking off-site and the way that the car park operates and vehicles access and egress it.
Thank you very much, and as I said, we'll look in due course as to whether the suggested conditions or obligations fulfil those expectations. Any other questions, Mr. Cooper?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Any other questions from people who are speaking against the scheme? Now, I'll just check my own. The cycle routes, which I think you refer to these, and I'm going to be shown them on site, I'm told.
It's 4.9 if you look
Yeah,
at the reference
4.9.
in the proof, sir. 4.9 on page 11.
That's right. Are you planning to be on the site visit, or if not, will you point someone else to
I
where
spoke
they
to
are?
Mrs. Balbao yesterday. She's going to identify all the cycle routes, and we will both be on the site visit. So.
Splendid. Okay. And just to follow up of my question to her, were you satisfied that one car club space was appropriate for 220 flats?
Yes, based on the Zipcar report, obviously the provision of car club spaces is a commercial exercise, and they consider that that would be adequate. Clearly, I personally believe that car clubs is a key way forward in car use and will increase. And I think the car club company, if that were to happen, would look for other locations to provide them nearby.
And are there other locations that they could expand into?
Well, generally they would provide them maybe on a residential side road close to the site where a traffic order would be required to provide the space within that road.
And are there such roads nearby that would be attractively close?
Yes, I think just beyond the CPZ area, even within the CPZ area, it's not unusual to turn one of the CPZ bays into a car club bay if required.
Right. Okay, well, if something crosses your mind between now and the site visit, perhaps you'd point that out to me as well. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, sir. I have no re-examination. Thank you.
Thank you. Please introduce your next witness.
Thank you. That's Mr. Simmons. Give us a moment just to swap over.
Okay.
Sir, as you know, no doubt, Mr. Simmons' statement is actually Enquiry Document 1, I believe.
Yeah.
I hope it is. He gave out on the first morning.
That's the one, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Simmons, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And so I'm going to introduce Mr. Simmons by reference to this statement and use this statement if that's acceptable to you, and just ask him to highlight one or two matters, hopefully before any questions are asked of him. So Mr. Simmons, if we go to your 1.1 please, under your introduction, excuse me, you give your name as Clive Victor Simmons.
Yes.
And you've been employed by Croydon London Borough Council since 1989, and that's as a pollution officer and safety and licensing officer.
Yes, I'm not a safety and licensing officer now. I was for 9 years, from 95 to 2004. The other two, before then and afterwards, I was and am a pollution officer.
Thank you. And you tell us you've many continuing professional development certificates in various fields regarding air quality, including the ADMS Urban and Roads Modelling Training at Cambridge Environmental Research Consultants.
That's correct, yes.
You go on to tell us you've 28 years experience in the public sector, that's 19 years as a pollution officer for air quality and noise, and that's at this council.
That's correct.
Thank you. And you have been involved, you tell us in 1.3, in providing environmental consultation observation comments for numerous commercial and residential development schemes and change of use applications.
That's right.
And you've been in the environmental consultant in relation to this planning application, and that has been throughout.
Yes.
And you tell us you're familiar with the area of the calling site and the environmental policy context within which it has been considered.
Correct.
Thank you. Now, we've already set the scene as to the fact that you're addressing concerns raised by the Member of Parliament and others, including Dr. Peter Boffa. That's your 1.6. And in your section 2, Mr. Simmons, you deal with air quality issues in the context of the policy, just expanding upon Mr. White's evidence that he has in his proof of evidence. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And I think perhaps we can go first to 2.6, because of course there you refer to the air quality assessment on behalf of the applicants, that their consultant isn't available, as Mr. Katkowski confirmed yesterday.
That's right.
But that's Amek Foster Wheeler. But presumably that's something you took into account?
That is something I have to take into account, yes.
Yeah. Can I just ask you, please, given that they're not present, that air quality assessment, how does it measure in accordance with existing guidance and policy?
First of all, the methodology was accurate. It follows the guidance documents that are listed from 2.2 through to 2.5. It lists this within itself. This reference to this document is CD 1.22. This is the air quality assessment.
Yeah, thank you.
Its conclusions are that there are exceedances of the NO2, nitrogen dioxide, annual mean air quality objective at the parts of the development, and therefore mitigation is required. That's its conclusion, in broad terms.
And you set that out in your following paragraphs. You refer to that from 2.7 down to 2.9.
Yes.
Set out there. I think we can probably take those as read. What I want to ask you then, in terms of any exceedance though, I mean, in terms of any exceedance of the accepted levels, is any exceedance of those levels caused by this development?
No, the development, for all intents and purposes, the development is, according to the guidance, air quality neutral. Its effect will be negligible upon the existing air quality background. What the development is doing, it is placing people in along the Brighton Road facade and the junctions of Banstead Road and Russell Hill Road in a polluted, it is giving a polluted facade in these places. That's where the mitigation is needed.
Before we come on to the mitigation measures, can I just be clear though, if we look at your 2.9 and your 210, in terms of any increase, how do you describe those increases?
The increases vary from slight to moderate at other parts of near the development. If we're talking about the development itself, there is quite a significant breach of the air quality objectives, not for particulate matter, but for nitrogen dioxide.
Is that an existing breach?
That is existing now,
Yeah.
yes.
Well,
The development's effect on those levels will be negligible.
Yeah, that's what I want to get clear, how you describe the increases of that.
Yes.
Thank you. Negligible.
Negligible, officially a negligible increase, which is a word that is accepted by these policy documents.
Thank you very much. Then, to deal with any increase, though, that you referred to this already, there are various measures, and I think you address those in 211, don't you, and 212?
Yes, that's right. The first measure will be the design of the building. The recommendation of the air quality assessment is that the ground floor the first floor and the second floor of the proposed building, where there are dwellings, they should have air quality in all dwellings that is below the air quality objective level. So they should have clean air. In order to do that, they will have to have a mechanical ventilation and heat recovery system with additional filters for nitrogen dioxide and nitric oxide, NOx as we call it, which will ensure clean air to those in those dwellings and in other spaces in this building, on the ground floor. In addition to that, by way of proactive measures that are in our air quality action plan, which we have to have by law, as we've declared the whole of Croydon to be an air quality management area, and this, as many people have observed, this is a busy gyratory system, and therefore pollution levels are elevated. I'm not denying that, and the report says so as well. In order to do that, we mitigate, and we do this in lots of premises. We have idling vehicle patrols and raising awareness in local schools and businesses to encourage and educate people to use their vehicles sensibly, to not idle, to join car clubs, to use other forms of transport to alleviate the air quality problem in Croydon and Purley.
Just pausing there a moment. The idling patrols, how long has that measure been taken?
The idling patrols started in 2005. I sort of started them, really. They were the first idling patrols in London, and I think the first idling patrols in the country. We perceived that there was a problem, and we got complaints about various vehicles idling in places they shouldn't be idling. Outside schools, bus stands, taxi ranks. We produced, I've got a document here which isn't referenced, but these are our idling vehicle leaflets that I have been handing out, and myself and other officers, stating that it is an offence. I can give these to people if you want one, sir.
Do you want me to make this an inquiry document?
Yes, so yes, if it help you.
I'll pass them out to the...
I think we're on to 12, aren't we? Please.
Yeah, by all means, while I do the housekeeping. So, idling leaflets.
I think I could have one. I don't know. Sorry.
The legislation is not new. It's been around since 1986. But councils are sometimes reluctant to enforce it, but we've embraced it. It's fairly easy to enforce, to be honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms, you've heard concerns about traffic waiting to leave the development on Russell Hill Road in particular. You heard that. I mean, how would it work in that respect then?
In that respect, we would, when we do patrols, we tend to go out 2 or maybe 3 officers, and we usually, let's say we're doing Croydon Town Centre or very similar at the island site here. We do circular patrols. We are identified with tabards on, so we're legally identified, and we have our identification with us. And if we see an idling vehicle parked in a street, then we instruct the driver to turn the engine off. If the driver refuses, they can get a fixed penalty notice. I have to tell you, drivers do not refuse, because if they're in a parking bay, unless there's a good reason for them to be idling. Let's say there's a frozen meat van that needs to be idling for a minute while he does his delivery, that's fair enough. If it is just someone waiting to pick someone up, we tell them to turn the engine off, please. And as I say, they always comply.
And that, thank you for explaining that, and the £6,000 contribution, we will deal with this obviously later, but you refer to in 211, that goes to ensure there's sufficient resources with regard to that.
Correct, and raising awareness as well in schools. It's not just about enforcement, it's about changing a culture so that people don't sit outside places idling their engines and think about how they use their cars.
Okay. Thank you. And then, just before we move on to the last section of your statement, if we go to 2.14, I think you may have already touched upon this, just to make sure we haven't overlooked it. You talk about the development being air quality neutral.
Yes.
Just explain briefly what that is.
Well, it goes into it further on page 41 of the air quality assessment. I won't go into that now because it's very technical. What it means is it assesses benchmarks for emissions, both from buildings and traffic, that have been assessed by the model, the ADMS, the Atmospheric Dispersion Model, which is the accepted industry standard for air quality assessments. That model takes in traffic flow, wind, meteorological data from the nearby station, 6 kilometres south of here, I believe. It takes in lots of data, road widths, topography, geography, building types, building heights, and assesses all that is going on this site. So the design of the new building, the number of vehicles using it, and against benchmarks for emissions for buildings and transport. And if they meet those, which are listed in the various supporting documents, if it meets those, then it is declared air quality neutral.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Then moving on to the section 3, the final part of your statement, it's where you're addressing concerns of the Residents Association, the all 6 parties, and Dr. Boffa.
That's
we
right.
referred to, and this is particularly in the context of their concern about particulates.
Yes, the data that the residents have forwarded, I believe to be accurate. I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. But the relevant data here and the relevant benchmarks here are the residents, sorry, let me clarify a bit more. The residents have quoted World Health Organization guidelines, which are valid, and some countries like Canada and USA choose to enforce them in various states and provinces. In this country and in Europe, we adhere to the European directive, and which has been adopted as UK air quality objectives. Now, for particulate matter, for PM2.5, very small items, I'm sure you know, so, of particulate matter, very
2.5 is microns.
2.5 microns in diameter, correct, yes. The objective is an annual mean, so an annual average, of 25 micrograms per cubic metre. The levels quoted by the Residents Association at Purley Cross Gyratory are 16 to 17. Actually, this is sort of borne out by the air quality assessment, which places them at about 20. So yeah. The Mayor's underestimating it a bit, but these things are often 1 or 2 microns out. Even so, both levels are within that annual mean. So for this development and for all the surrounding roads, particulate matter is not breaching the air quality objectives.
And you set that out in your statement. I don't ask you to take that any further at this stage. You can be asked about that. The only thing I want to ask you, in addition to that, was just for completeness. It may seem self-evident, but for completeness, have you seen the response in the applicant's document? It's Enquiry Document 8, where they give a schedule of assessment of the matters raised by the Riddlesdown Residents Association. Have you seen that?
I have seen that,
yes.
Yes.
Have you seen in particular, obviously, the air pollution comments?
On page 12, yes.
On page 12 and over, I believe.
Yes, I've read those comments, and curiously, they're almost exactly what I've put. I didn't know that when I made my comments, but they coincide.
Thank you. So that's all I wanted to ask. Anything else you needed to say at this stage? Or have we covered everything?
The only thing I'd like to say, sir, is, and it might be too early to talk about conditions, but we would support a visitor management strategy, which I believe is proposed to include idling action to prevent unnecessary idling on this premises, on this private premises in the car park, as Mr. Burton mentioned briefly.
So that completes the evidence in chief. Thank you.
Mr. King.
Thank you very much for your explanation. We used the mayor's statistics because the mayor for London is responsible for the area. And could I ask why you think the mayor chose to use WHO's stats rather than the ones you've used, which is DEFRA and European?
I don't know, sir. I don't know the answer to that. All I can say is that he is striving for a very high standard by 2030, and that is admirable. But at the moment, we can only adhere to what the Environment Act and what the Institute of Air Quality Management guidelines give us for for air quality objectives. If you were to apply these very stringent WHO standards, hardly anything would get built in the whole of London, to be honest, because air quality levels would be breached, as you've said so yourself, even on Riddlesdown and Kennedy Common.
Yeah. The other question I have is, do you think at some stage, or does the mayor have the powers to introduce additional requirements other than the DEFRA European ones in London?
He does, and actually he is. At the moment, they are reviewing the low emission zone to be more stringent, and it's a consultation document. I can't talk too much about it, I suppose, and I might be speaking out of turn. But London legislation is separate from, the LEZ, the London Low Emission Zone, was the first of its kind in this country, created by, I don't know whether it was a previous mayor who created it. I think it was Boris Johnson, not Sadiq Khan. But yes, the mayor does have certain powers over air quality within this capital and can make legislative changes.
Yeah. And I think you agree with us that the map, although the quality of the colours on the map that you find on the website are difficult, but it clearly shows Purley Gyratory sticks out for the whole of the south.
I agree with that, yes.
Right. The other issue, our concern is not so much the increase in volume of traffic that this will create, it's as it tries to enter and exit into Russell Hill, it will interrupt the flow of the existing traffic. Mm-hmm. And that will cause that to be stationary, which we believe that's where a lot of the increase in pollutants, whether they're nitrous oxide or PM2s, will occur. Do you think that's a likelihood?
It's possible, yes, it's certainly possible. That's why we will have anti-idling patrols to try and reduce unnecessary idling as much as possible. Fortunately, with today's technology in the last 5 years, cars, when they are stationary, often cut out now, even at traffic lights, which is a good thing, and that's going to get better and better. Technology will improve this situation and is improving it. But yeah, I don't deny that there is always going to be a problem from a queue of traffic which is idling its engines, which is why the levels are elevated along sections of Brighton Road and the junctions of Banstead Road and Russell Hill Road, which the report bears out.
Right. I think we as resident associations are in support of your idling patrols.
Thank you.
But could I ask how it actually works? Do you have a programme of places you visit, or does it rely on somebody phoning or making a complaint that this continually happens in our street, or do you have a programme?
It's a bit of both, sir. It's often complaint driven. We had a complaint about a school in Riddlesdown just before Christmas, and I went out with a couple of officers, and we had a very civil talk with some of the people waiting to pick their children up, and it worked well. Sometimes we do patrols in central Croydon. It's resource dependent, as I'm sure you realise. We are a little bit stretched at the council, which is why this £6,000 will be very helpful towards either freeing officers' time or engaging other officers to take part, and bigger teams to go around in conurbation areas or district centres like Purley, like East Croydon, taxi ranks. I've already visited the taxi rank at Purley 2 or 3 years ago. That was due to a complaint, and then I follow up those complaints sometimes, again, time permitting, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. Usually bus drivers and taxi drivers recognise me from a couple of weeks before and switch off their engine without me having had to do anything, but That's quite a nice coincidence.
Right. And the development will make a contribution towards your idling patrols,
Yes.
but that would apply to anywhere in Croydon. It won't mean that you will do extra patrols.
Well, no, we
in
will focus that
Purley.
on Purley. We will focus it on schools around Purley to give talks on clean air matters, and we will focus on patrols in Purley that £6,000 will allow for.
And that will be in Purley Town Centre.
Yes, it will. It will be. We will do patrols around the island
Yeah.
and along Brighton Road and anywhere else that is necessary in this
And-
district.
Just to understand precisely that your idling patrol can make people who are parked switch off, but not necessarily people who are stationary in a traffic queue.
It's a good point. It's a very good point. We took this to DEFRA about 8 or 9 years ago and wanted a legal opinion. We also asked our own people, our own legal bods at the time. When a car is in a street driving along, even if it's stationary, it's traffic. And we can't enforce in traffic. We can only enforce parked vehicles. Now, as I say, if I'm in a queue of traffic and it looks like I'm not going to move for a minute, I turn my engine off. And I recommend that other people do the same. And as I say, with modern technology, engines switch off automatically. But yes, the answer to your question is we cannot enforce stationary traffic, only parked vehicles.
Right. And then I come to the difference between the public highway and the roads within this development.
Yes.
And I presume
There is a difference.
once they're in the development, then it becomes the responsibility of the church,
That's
not
correct.
yourselves.
That's correct. We cannot enforce on private property, only on vehicles parked in a road or street, public road or street. So on this premises, we will be looking for proactive strategies and action to prevent idling in the proposed car park here, and for people queuing up to leave this premises.
And that will, I presume, include some discussion, and training might seem a bit over the top, but some training of relevant people within this all.
I will be happy to do that training, as would other officers, certainly.
Thank you. Lee, do you want to ask a question? Lee.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
You've already mentioned that the area exceeds the 2008 EU regulations for nitrogen dioxide.
Yes.
And section 2.10 of the statement indicates that this will increase.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that the EU levels for pollutants which are considered harmful to human health are actually legally binding.
Yes.
So in your expert opinion, do you maintain that this development will adhere to EU law?
The development will create a negligible increase in...
But it will increase.
In O2. But there will be an increase, but it's going to be a very small increase.
And
But
you
this could be largely due to the model indicating increased traffic flows as well, because the model takes in not just this development, but the traffic flows that are around it. So if you didn't have this development, there would still be an increase. But it has to be acknowledged that after the development, there will be an increase.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from those speaking opposed? Okay, a few questions from me. First of all, probably missed it, but what's the date of your statement, please?
Sorry, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, it seems to be left off.
Is it recent or?
It's very recent.
I can tell you, sir, from my recollection, it was finalised, because I was asked to check it, on the Friday before the inquiry.
Oh, right,
correct.
so it's very recent.
Yeah, last week. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah.
That's the honest answer. That's when it was finalised.
Sorry, Stephen.
No, not at all. I remember doing it.
No, that's quite all right. The air quality assessment is a year or two old, isn't it?
It is. It's March 2016, so yeah.
Right. Because it talks about, and I've lost the reference, I'm afraid, but it talks about the emissions from vehicles generally across the country likely to decrease because of the
That's
improvements in technology.
Correct.
Was it not written before the diesel scandal?
Yes, diesel scandals. Yeah, good point. I'm not sure. But what is true is that
Sorry, you're not sure?
the diesel scandal was. I'm kind of trying to recollect the date of the diesel scandal.
Well, the point of my question is that that prediction that it would generally levels would decrease has been shown not to be correct by the diesel scandal, which is why that statement jumped out
yes,
at me.
it's not going to decrease as they thought it would. Technology is still improving diesel vehicles. Euro 6 engines and are being used more and more, which is a standard that will decrease as technology is used in newer vehicles. There have been mistakes made in earlier diesel engines, the assessment of which has been.
To be fair, there weren't mistakes, were they?
Well, the assessment was wrong.
No, my reading of it is that it was deliberately misleading by Volkswagen manufacturers.
Well, yes, by Volkswagen, yes, that's certainly true. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay. So, does that not mean that the predictions are incorrect?
I think, again, there is always, and it states this in the report, there is always an allowance for a 1.5% anomaly in these, because the model is it is a model. It cannot be accurate to the nth degree, but it is pretty accurate. I'm not sure. I don't know if that was factored in. I don't think it probably was.
I mean, you say it's pretty accurate, but my understanding from just general reading is that the diesel scandal means that it was quite a long way out.
Yes,
Have you any facts or figures to
I don't
bear up the fact that it's accurate?
I don't. All I know is that the ADMS modelling programs, modelling computer programs, are adjusted accordingly all the time. So if there are anomalies in the emissions, and these are known at the time, then they will have been taken into account. This is not mentioned in the report.
And it's not mentioned in your statement?
It's not mentioned in my statement, no. As regards, I didn't write the report, so I'm only commenting on it, and I take it as it's written. It has adhered to the documents, the policy documents that I must adhere to, and I've looked at it and judged it to be, at its time, a fair report.
Now, you referred to policy documents. Now, the government's been successfully taken to court, I think it's 3 times over its air quality plan. What's the latest position on that?
The latest position is that I think I know certain standards have to be achieved by 2020 that may not or probably will not be achieved. Then there may be sanctions from the European Parliament. But I'm afraid I don't know the latest. I don't know the latest news. I just know that legal action may be taken against governments rather than councils.
And if the UK government were actually to put into place a plan that would achieve what the EU would require without sanctions, what would that entail?
It might mean more stringent objectives. It would have to mean more stringent objectives regarding emissions for vehicles, regarding emissions for buildings, and requirements for development.
And how would that affect the development we're looking at today?
it's difficult to say. It might mean that the applicant would have to put in more mitigation, maybe at higher levels of floors. As it is, the applicant has put in mitigation at levels that are not exceeding. The applicant has been quite generous. According to this report, it really only needed to put in mitigation for the first 2 floors of the dwelling, but it has offered, in fairness and to be robust, to put it in for the first 3 floors of the whole proposal. It might mean that there would be other filtration, other things that might have to be put into place.
As I was saying yesterday, I haven't read every word of the documents for this inquiry. It would have taken me a year to do so. So you say that the applicant's been quite generous. Only first 2 floors were required, but they put in for 3.
Yeah.
Can you give me the references for that, please?
Yes, these are in the air quality assessment. The data on page in Appendix D.
Right.
I'll give you the page numbers. Where we have, and on page, if we go to page D3,
Right.
we have.
Do you know what page that is overall in the?
Oh, sorry. Overall,
it's in the tables. Is that right?
yes, it's near the. It's at the rear. It's at the back of the document. It's sort of as an appendix.
Okay. Here we go. I found Appendix D.
And if we go, it says ADMS roads and ADMS results.
Yeah.
And table D1, if we go down to where it says development 1, it's on the second. It's actually it's on page D3.
Right.
And if we go down to 3/4 of the way down that page, we have development 1. Now these are the 13 receptors around the development. And if we look, it's actually helpfully highlighted in bold.
Yeah.
These are the receptors that are with the development traffic and energy centre, where you will have an exceedance of the air quality objectives. As you can see, development 4, and there's that 1.5 metres is the height of the modelling, so sort of human height, if you will, where you breathe in.
Right.
So we have development 4, development 5, development 6, development 7, and then development 9, development 10, 11 and 12 are all exceeding the air quality objective of 40 micrograms per cubic metre for nitrogen dioxide as an annual mean. So mitigation is required there. If we go on to page if we go on to page D4, and then we have the modelling and predictions for a height of 4.5 metres, which is at the first floor height.
Okay.
There you can see 24, 26, 29, 39, so it's getting near there, 38, 38, 34. So you're pushing it there, you're nearing the objective there with those results. So you certainly need mitigation at the first floor. At the second floor, at a height of 7.5 metres, again, this is on page D5. Again, you have the 13 development receptors listed, and you have, as you can see, development 1, 21, 23, 25. We are now comfortably within the air quality objective. And I predict that if the air quality objective were made more stringent, say moved down to 35, well, you would be within it then. Even if it were moved to 30, you would be within it then. That is unlikely, but who knows what will happen in the future. So those on that second floor.
So just so I got my note correct, the air quality objective is 40.
Yes, it is.
Now, what's that in units, and where does it come from? Where does that figure come from?
Right, that figure has come from the European directive, which has been adopted as the Environment Act 1995. There was an early European directive.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that, yeah. Okay.
And that's how these figures were arrived at. They were based on human health at the time. They may become more stringent as you say. We learn about the effects of diesel particulate.
Yeah. But I've heard your evidence that it's 40 at the moment, and it's even if it came down to 30, this would cover it.
This would certainly cover it, because when we go to the third floor, the levels really get low.
Okay, fine. Now the next thing is that my initial understanding was that this applied to residential flats.
Yes.
But you're telling me it's not just residential flats.
Well,
Do you want to talk me through what's in the ground first and second that would be covered?
right, well, all dwellings will be covered.
Okay.
Anywhere where someone is living will be covered. The modelling of the development of the community centre has shown that levels within the centre are low enough not to require any mitigation.
Okay.
Because we are talking
Explain
about
that.
facade. The problem is at the facade where people want to open their windows.
Right, okay. So how come the community centre then, how come, if that's the ground floor,
Because
how come that doesn't require it?
Two reasons. One is there will be a barrier in around either glazing or structure around the development, which acts as a barrier. Like we're in this room now, the air quality in here will be pretty good, I can anecdotally state. But the other thing is
there's no barrier here apart from...
No, well, there are doors and there is also distance.
Right, okay.
At
yeah.
distance, levels dissipate.
I understand that.
Yeah, very
I
quickly.
understand that principle. Okay, so the barrier around, which barrier are you...
I'm talking about the fabric of the building.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the fabric of the building will act as a barrier. But you see, at facade level on the first floor, those windows, if someone has an open window there, that person will be exposed to an unacceptable level. That's why there has to be mechanical ventilation at the first floor and second floor and ground floor.
Okay. Okay, and so what other uses are there where there are people that are going to be there for much of a day or for a reasonable length of time, where there are windows close to the surrounding streets?
Sorry, so you talk in the development?
In the development that's proposed, okay, you've talked about the dwellings that would have mechanical plant.
Yep.
What about the other uses, the community uses you say that are further away? What about other things like there's the shop, there's the Purley Centre, there's...
Well, that's right. The model has taken into account the church use and the community use, and it has not indicated that any of the air quality objectives will be breached for people using those. It has to protect dwellings because of the amount of time that people spend in dwellings.
Yeah.
It acknowledges that a community use is briefer than that.
But what about someone working all day in a shop?
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, a lot will depend. I looked at the meeting place.
Well, have you looked at it?
I have looked at it, and looking at the plans where the shop is located, it is unlikely that they will receive an unacceptable level of air pollution because it's not. It's not the facade will be protecting these premises.
Right.
It is up. I mean, if the applicant wants to put in mechanical ventilation for these areas, it could do. But
I mean, the best you can say is it's unlikely.
Well, according to the,
You're not sure.
it's more than unlikely. According to the receptors in the air quality assessment, it's acceptable.
So there is a receptor for the shop.
Yeah, they have described the receptors throughout the centre.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Where are those, please? As I say, my apologies that I don't know the information.
No, that's fine. Of course, it's.
I don't know if I can just help him, and obviously the witness will answer in relation to the technical details.
Let's do this correctly. Do you want to tell Mr. Morgan and Mr. Morgan?
No, sir, because this is my application and my documentation explains there will be mechanical ventilation in relation to air quality throughohout the building, residential and the church and the community.
Then that would be helpful. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't pick that up.
Please take me to it.
5.10 of the design and access statement.
Right.
Which is core document 1.10. So just to put everyone out there misery on this.
So core document
1.10.
1.10.
Paragraph 5.10.
5.10.
Page 160 states in terms.
Yeah.
And I'll read it out.
Yeah.
Just find it. Under the heading of air quality.
Right.
And mitigation to meet national air quality objectives, mechanical ventilation will be installed in all elements of the building, both the Baptist Centre and the residential element, etc., etc.
Right, well, I apologise because I didn't see that in the air quality assessment.
No, that's fine, because it's
It
not
wasn't- it's not in there.
required in terms of air quality objectives.
Correct.
We're doing it
Right.
because we're that kind of people, sir.
Right. Well, you know, that's the sort of thing I like to hear, but I haven't heard it necessarily in terms of air quality.
And it's in the note that we're going to be putting in later.
Well, that's it. That's even better. Okay. So let me just turn that up. 5.10.
Thank you, sir. Sorry to interrupt.
No. It was a useful interruption.
Well, that makes a change in my case. Sir.
Right. Okay. So there's a bold statement there. Mechanical ventilation will be installed in all elements of the building to ensure the air quality is acceptable. Does that mean literally every single room on the ground, first, second floor?
So I understand it, sir, but we can, when we come to conditions, we can ensure that it's
That it's secure. Right. Okay. That's helpful. Dealt with that one. The commendable stuff you've told the inquiry about idling. What sort of percentage difference do you think that makes on air quality?
Locally and acutely, it makes a big difference, because if you live in a cul-de-sac where people pull up to collect their children from school, and you have the same vehicle idling outside your house every day, that's going to make a huge difference. Statistically, not a huge difference, obviously, as an annual mean expressed, but as a local action.
Well, I mean,
it changes people's lives.
Statistics refer to that cul-de-sac. If it's a big difference, then the statistics should show.
Indeed, our complaint statistics for the council would show it, but
Right.
air quality national or even London levels would not pick up on it, obviously.
Okay. And you said that taxi drivers tend to see you coming and switch off their engines.
And bus
Does that
drivers.
mean that, and bus drivers, does that mean that while your action is successful, it's only temporarily successful?
It certainly has. It may be that regular patrols work well, even if you're only patrolling, say, once a month on a certain area, as we used to years ago when we had more resources. The bus drivers get used to you. They tell their friends back at the depot, "Well, watch out for the bloke who tells you to turn your engine off."
Right.
And yes, there's the culture of turning an engine off becomes ingrained, and if you stop monitoring it, they can slip back into old ways.
And how much difference would £6,000 make in terms of employing an officer?
I was discussing this with a colleague, and we think we could at least do 6 patrols a year in the Purley area, which is once a month. We might be able to do more if there were a perceived problem or target particular areas.
And, 6 patrols a year is one a month?
Once every 2 months, sorry.
Okay, and in the Purley area, how often is it likely to be around the development site?
Every patrol would encompass the development site.
Right.
It would encompass the whole of Purley. A patrol usually lasts an hour and a half. Right. So maybe longer if necessary.
Right. And then shortly after that, some of the people will stop bothering and let their engines idle again, and it'll be another almost 2 months before someone comes back.
It may be the case. If there is a perceived problem, we encourage people to contact us. On that leaflet there is a number to contact the council, and if someone really is behaving badly and irresponsibly, we will go out and concentrate on that as we do. We've been doing it since 2005.
Thank you. I've no further questions. Mr. Morgan, any re-examination?
2 matters, if I may, sir. After I've done those 2 matters, I just want to, if I may, just address you on the air quality point for a moment.
Yeah,
I'll do rather than take it up in re-examination, probably better I'll just deal with my two succinct points and come back to that. Firstly, could you help us, Mr. Simmons, regarding point made by Mr. Cooper, I think, and also touched upon by the inspector. I think I asked you this in chief, but just to avoid any doubt, as a result of the development, would it cause in any case, in terms of the pollution issues we're discussing, an exceedance of any EU level?
The development itself won't cause it because it already exists.
Thank you. Now, the second matter, in relation to understandably what the inspector asked you about, with regard to, and it's an issue that often comes up, the diesel scandal, people lose confidence in the figures used. Now, I don't know how far you can take me, but I'll just ask you, please, to go to the air quality assessment.
Yes.
That you were looking at with the inspector in particular. Would you go to page 24? We just see the approach taken, and if you can't help me, say so, and I'll deal with it in a moment. But on page 24, if you go down to the second paragraph, for example, the proposed development is expected to be fully open and operational in 2021. In view of uncertainties around future pollutant emissions and the potential for early occupation of some parts of the development, 2019 background concentrations and emission factors have been used in the opening year scenarios. This is a conservative approach, as traffic emissions are predicted to decline each year as new vehicles replace older ones, so emissions are likely to be lower in 2021. Then it sets out the scenarios that have been modelled. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And it then refers after those, I won't read those out, let the inspector look at them, but I won't read them out.
No, it's very helpful. It's the passage I was referring to and couldn't find earlier. But carry on, please.
And could I, sir, sorry.
This is a complex issue, and I've actually been involved directly in a case where this very point was raised in the High Court, and there's often a misunderstanding as to data used, because if you go below the paragraph, it says emissions were calculated using the latest emissions factors from DEFRA. Do you see that, the emission toolkit? Are you familiar with those? I'm not going to ask any detail, but just to make sure you're familiar with them.
These are updated almost every year.
So, to the best of your knowledge, and if you can't say so, please, because I'm not trying to mislead anyone, were the appropriate emissions factored from DEFRA used at that time?
Yes, definitely.
I understand. Okay, well, we can look at that. But in terms of them referring to a conservative approach, again, if you can comment on that, is that your understanding of the report?
Yes. Which paragraph? Sorry.
The conservative approach was in the second paragraph down from the title of the road network.
Yeah.
Do you remember? It was after the first sentence I read out to you. They explain that the development is expected to be fully open and operational 2021.
Yes. That's right. It is a conservative approach. If anything, this assessment has overestimated the pollution levels, which is borne out by the higher levels for PM than the Mayor's map indicates. And it is a conservative approach, so it's belt and braces really for this report.
Thank you very much. So I need to ask you anything.
Before you go, it was a conservative approach on the future baseline predicted for 2019 in 2016 before the emission scandal. You said it's updated every year.
But the DEFRA
So have
information
you compared the last year's DEFRA figures with the figures that they were using at the time, which were presumably the previous years or year before?
No, I haven't, sir. I would think the author of this report did, but they're not here to ask. But no, I didn't do that.
No, I will check that, sir, because my recollection is that from my previous direct experience in this very point.
Well, that may be helpful.
My recollection is that about that time, because I think my air quality, the one I have in mind, is about the same, there were the new guidance coming through, and they were taking into account the Euro 5 and the Euro 6 emissions, which made a difference. So it actually made, if anything, an over-egging, and I don't think that the diesel scandal actually made any difference to that, quite frankly. I will check that, and I'm sure the applicants will, and we can give you a note on that. But I think we can give you comfort on that, and we will seek to do so.
Yes, sir, that was my understanding as I interpreted the report.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll take a break now until 5 to 12. Fire is adjourned.
In substance.
Right, could you take your seats, please? The inquiry is resumed. Mr. Morgan, I believe we're on to your last witness, is that correct?
I am, sir. Last and certainly not least, Mr. James White, and you should have from Mr. White a proof of evidence.
I do, thank you.
That should be accompanied by 7 appendices.
It is.
And there's also a summary, but we're not going to use that, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem.
I'm going to introduce Mr. White in the usual way, and then he's going to take you through essentially some parts of Section 8, which is his overall assessment, and read some of those paragraphs out and comment on some others. And I think, sir, and there's a couple of matters just arising at the inquiry, 2 matters, and we'll deal with those as well, and that will comprise the presentation. So, Mr. White, if we can go, please, to your page 1 of your main proof, and in your paragraph 1.2, you tell us you are James White and you are Deputy Team Leader, North Team with Croydon.
Correct.
Thank you. You hold, in terms of your qualifications, you hold an MA in Planning, Policy and Practice. You are a licentiate member of the Royal Town Planning Institute.
Correct.
Thank you. You have 14 years experience in the public sector. That was 3 years at Tandridge District Council and then 11 at Croydon.
Correct.
Thank you. You have been involved, you go on to tell us, in the determination of planning applications and involved in appeal work on numerous commercial and residential development schemes and change of use applications.
Yes, many.
And turning to the current scheme, you tell us you've been the planning application case officer for the proposed development, and that's been throughout.
Indeed.
You are familiar, you confirm with the area of the call-in site and the policy context within which it has been considered.
Yes.
And actually, before we go to your Section 8, that policy understanding, just to identify, you assessed the proposals in Section 7 and you, I think I can fairly say, comprehensively assess it against all the policies, both national, local, adopted and emerging. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And I think just to assist others, because there's a lot of policy, you've dealt with it, you've also included a summary of that in your Appendix 1, I believe.
Yes, there's a summary of the adopted policies in Appendix 1. The emerging ones tend to sit through Section 7.
Thank you very much. And so if we can turn then, as I indicated we would, to your Section 8 on page 51. And just before I ask you to read from 8.1, one thing that I think it would help in the light of the identification of the policy section has arisen at the inquiry is if you could just tell us what the latest position is, please, on the emerging local plan. That's CLP 1.1 and CLP 2.
Yes. So I understand from the policy team that an informal consultation on modifications to the main modifications to the policy on hot food takeaways closed last Friday, and the council's hopeful for adoption on the 27th of February. That obviously the hot food takeaway isn't related to this proposal.
No, sorry, I didn't follow that. The hot food takeaway consultation, is that
consultation? No, the consultation on the main modifications has been carried out,
yes.
And then the inspector sought an informal consultation on modifications to one policy of the main modifications, and that was the hot food takeaway.
And that was an informal consultation?
Yes, an informal consultation.
Okay.
So because that led, I think, you can confirm this, but just to assist you better, so that's led to the slight putting back of the timetable that you might have seen in the proof of evidence.
Yeah, we were hoping, well, the council was hoping to adopt it towards the end of January, but that's been moved back.
Right, but now the adoption of the entire plan is anticipated on the 27th of February.
That's what we're hoping for, yeah.
Thank you, that's extremely useful.
27th of February. Yeah.
27th of February this year, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. White. Then we can go, as I say, to your 8.1. I'm going to ask you, please, to read from that through to 8.14, I believe. You take us through that, please.
Okay. So the proposed development does not depart from the local development plan. However, there are some elements identified in my proof that could be described as negative, but I have concluded as acceptable and balanced. Based on the scheme overall, this section pulls together those elements and weighs it against the positives. Overall, the proposal would result in clear benefits that strongly outweigh any harm arising, even allowing for the considerable weight that should be given to the less than substantial harm to the Grade 2 listed Purley Library building, and the minor harm to the Brighton Road LASK and locally listed 960 Brighton Road, as set out in Mr. Lacavara's evidence. Mr. Lacavara's evidence also concludes that this harm caused has been minimised and mitigated through careful design and is satisfied that the proposed development will comply with the MPPF. In terms of housing, the scheme provides 18% affordable housing, split slightly in favour of affordable rent from the policy position, when 50% is the minimum. It exceeds the London Plan density matrix and does not meet the local overarching strategic target for 3+ bedrooms, which seeks 60%. There are some impacts on neighbouring occupiers, be it through sun, daylight, overlooking or visual intrusion, and primarily these are based on nearby buildings. Sorry?
Don't worry.
Oh.
As long as you can be heard. Please.
There would be an increase in noise and general disturbance, although this is unlikely to be perceptible given the existing context. There are impacts on the surrounding environment. The local microclimate would be altered, and the building is close to flood zones and an area subject to surface water runoff. Some trees are lost, including a preserved tree, and the local air environment is not ideal. The full extent of ground conditions is not known in terms of potential contamination. However, these matters can be addressed satisfactorily. The increase in wind speeds relates to comfort and are in locations where it does not raise a concern. And I'd also sort of add in at this point here, one of the issues raised by the Rule 6 Party in their second statement of case was in relation to safety and HGVs and wind along the Brighton Road. And in actual fact, the report makes clear that there would be an improvement to safety conditions along Brighton Road. The design location of the buildings has sensitively factored in the nearby flood zones and surface water flooding, and subject to proposed conditions in relation to suds and drainage, this would be acceptable. And we heard from the flood specialist the other day who highlighted that it would actually improve surface water runoff, and there's sufficient water infrastructure capacity will be secured by conditions. A comprehensive landscaping scheme is proposed, and the buildings have a negligible impact on the air quality and have also been designed to provide dwellings on the lower floors with appropriate ventilation. The principle of introducing residential uses into these locations has been established, and further to that, the proposed development has a number of low emission features and initiatives. A number of conditions in relation to contamination and preventing ground pollution are proposed. There are, moreover, a number of significant positives and benefits provided and secured by the scheme. The proposed land uses are all appropriately located, particularly given the sites are within and adjacent to a district centre, where there is the potential for growth and regeneration. As indicated by paragraph 63 of the MPPF, when considering the proposal, great weight should be given to outstanding or innovative designs, which help raise the standard of design more generally in the area. Vincent Lacavara's proof concludes that the scheme overall is of a high quality and that the island site is of an exceptionally high quality of design. And in my view, great weight can be attached to this conclusion when considering the scheme in the balance. In addition, the scheme optimises the use of this highly sustainable location. A significant amount of housing will be provided, including affordable housing, and a review mechanism also allows for the potential to provide for further affordable housing. The development will provide new and improved community facilities that are readily accessible by public transport, cycling and walking, and the regeneration of the sites will provide a sense of place and create a local identity, including the community use, that has historical connections with the site. The redevelopment of the long-term, highly prominent island site within Purley District Centre and the south site is long overdue. The community offering will be extensive, high quality, and provide new facilities to all age ranges, and I should add in there, and people with different physical abilities. The amount of activities offered shows a true community facility, and one that will create new connections with local people. This aspect of the scheme will turn a derelict and prominent corner of Purley into a thriving and active area. A real sense of place will be created. I consider that the community facilities and the vitality that will come with it have a significant weight in the balance of considering this development. A community management plan will also make sure that this is appropriately run, providing extra comfort in relation to the appropriate managing of the facilities. An employment and training strategy will also provide additional opportunities for local residents. A good quality of living environment is provided for future residents. And beyond the residential areas, a new public square, enhanced public landscaping, and a new link to the local library will be provided, benefiting new and existing residents. Ron Burton has concluded that the application site benefits from very good accessibility by non-car modes of travel, and that the proposed provision of cycle parking and car club bay and travel plans will ensure that opportunities for sustainable transport modes of travel will be taken up. In addition, he concludes that accesses to both sites have been safety audited and are considered safe and suitable. Vehicle trip generation from the sites is considered to be insignificant compared to traffic flows on the surrounding road network, and is therefore unlikely to have a significant impact on the operation of the highway network. The level of car parking provision is commensurate with national, regional and local policy for an area with very good public transport accessibility, and it has been demonstrated that there is ample space within nearby car parks for any overspill associated with the church use. In addition, there are a number of highway benefits secured, including the provision of a car club and membership funding, upgrading adjacent footways, travel plan monitoring, and safeguarding a parcel of land for TfL in the event that they require the land for highway works, which may improve the local road network. So, having had special regard to the desirability of preserving the settings of listed buildings and features of special architectural or historic interest as required by Section 66 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990, Vincent Lacavar's proof concludes that less than substantial harm is caused to the setting of the adjacent library Grade 2 listed building. He also considers that the modest harm is identified for the Brighton Road LASK and locally listed 960 Brighton Road. Based on Mr. Lacavar's views and my own assessment, I consider that the proposals would comply with paragraphs 134 and 135 of the NPPF. I consider that the less than substantial harm to the setting of the library, even giving that considerable weight as required by the listed building legislation, and the modest harm to the LASK and the locally listed building is outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme. And this is my view, even if the design was not considered to be outstanding, and thus engaged paragraph 63 of the NPPF. With the outstanding design, however, the balance in favour of the proposals is, in my view, even stronger. The benefits include the creation of improved community facilities, a new public space and wider regeneration and housing benefits, created by the provision of 220 new homes and 39 affordable housing units. The development does not display symptoms of overdevelopment, and that this is a suitable, high-quality development that would provide a number of benefits. In addition, there are many facets of this development, including the optimisation of urban locations that reflect the direction of travel of planning, both in a regional and national context. And there's a couple of documents that are referenced here. There's the London Mayor's A City for All Londoners, which is a precursor for the London, or the draft London plan that's now been dropped for consultation, and the Housing White Paper, Fixing Our Broken Housing Market. I won't go through all these in detail, but a few lines from the City for All Londoners. The document states that it wants to see more development in town centres, which are hubs for retail and community activity, particularly those that would benefit from regeneration and where resources are available, and that intensifying development around well-connected transport nodes will form an important part of the Mayor's vision for London. Going forward, now this is in relation to the White Paper, going forward, individual development proposals should make efficient use of land, address the particular scope for higher density housing in urban locations that are well served by public transport, take a flexible approach in adopting and applying policy and guidance that could inhibit these objectives in particular circumstances. So I would say that the call-in scheme is exactly the type of development that is required to meet the rising demand of housing that is described in these documents.
You're all right.
Thank you.
Try again.
So you're at 8:19, I think.
Yeah, no, I pretty much got to the end there.
Okay. Thank you. So have you highlighted all the matters you want to in terms of that guidance and the White Paper?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you very much. Then just a couple of matters, Mr. White, please. Just if you go back to your 8.4, where you're talking about impact on neighbouring occupiers, be it through sunlight, daylight, overlooking or visual intrusion, we ought to identify that you've detailed that obviously in your section 7. You've also included, I think, in JW5 photographs, haven't you, and the basis on which you've reached that assessment.
I have indeed, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a number of photos. We can also have a look on the site visit as well.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. And the other matter, please, which came up, I think, yesterday, was archaeology and the consultation, I think, from Heritage England on that. Could you just give the reference for the inspector, please?
Yes, the response from Historic England, CD 7.3, having viewed the assessment that was submitted with the application, which is CD 1.25, they were happy with the proposals and recommended a condition, which obviously forms part of the proposed conditions.
Thank you. That's all I specifically wanted to ask you, Mr. White. Is there anything else you want to say or say about the overall scheme in light of the evidence, or are you happy you've covered everything?
I am happy I've covered everything, but I think it's probably worth just making a few points about the community benefits of the scheme. And I know it went in depth yesterday with Mr. Pearson, so I don't want to spend too long on this. But I thought I'd highlight a few comments that were made in the inquiry. I noticed earlier in the week, Mr. C. King, he mentioned that the community, this is when was asked a question about the balance of affordable housing with community facilities, mentioned that they were of great importance, and I think I highly agree with that. The architect, Mr. Matthews, said that this was a very rare opportunity, and I think unique was the word he used, a scheme such as this. I'd endorse both of those views. I haven't come across a scheme like this. I also think it is of great importance. The Reverend Mr. Collins mentioned in his evidence that it was a shame that you couldn't be here whilst the church was operating effectively, to sort of see that, and in some respects, I doubt you see that before you go in full flow. But I have been. I've made many visits in and around this building over the last couple of years, and unannounced as well, not always planned. So it wasn't. There was nothing staged, and it was impressive to see the use and reach of this building. I've seen older people using this room for tea and cake afternoons. I've seen young children after school with nothing to do using the facilities outside to have a kick about. I've seen kids using your breakout room for after school as well. And I think the point is that the people of Purley use this, and the people of Purley are the community. So I would say that the community needs this facility, and I give that great weight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Thank you. So that completes the evidence in chief. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. King.
Start with the other Mr. King.
Mr. D. King. Not
Mr. D. King. Yeah.
Can you hold me? Yes. It's been an exciting project and it's gone on for a long time. Can you tell me the total number of dwellings in South Site and the island site?
Yeah, there's 220 overall. I believe there's 106. Gotta have to pull the description out. It's 106 and 110. So you've got 114 flats on the island sites and 106 flats on the south site.
Thank you. Any idea how many children? What would you estimate how many children would be here? Quite a few.
There would be.
Have you thought about that?
Yeah, there is a calculator, a tool that the mayor uses to sort of calculate play space, and I believe for want of a better word, the child yield is about 30. So the play space calculations are based on that calculator, and then that's projected into square meters to find appropriate play spaces.
Yeah. How many children do you think there will be? What's the that me?
It is. Do you want to sit back a little bit?
Yes, I will.
Maybe someone will adjust it.
There must be a considerable number of children, potential children here.
Yes, quite possibly.
Yes. Most definitely, sir.
Sorry, sir?
Most definitely.
Well, yeah. I would be very surprised if there were no children.
Yes. One of the delights here for the church is their provision of their hard-stand little playground next door.
Yeah.
What facility have they got of that type where they're going to be able to go and play football, kick a ball about, play cricket?
Well, cricket I'm not sure about, unless it was indoor French cricket. But they've got an indoor. There's an indoor hall in the lower levels of the basement where that could be used for a similar thing, kickabout, badminton, whatever, a whole variety of sports all year round as well. And I think that was touched on yesterday by Mr. Pearson.
Yes. You talk about the Rotary Field being close by for play space. For play.
Sorry, what would be close by?
For youngsters to go and play.
Rotary Field.
Rotary Field, yes.
Rotary Field, thank
Yes.
you. That was the bit I just...
Yeah.
Yes. So obviously, as I say, the child yield is predicted to be 30 for this, and that's taken from the mayor's calculations. There's ample doorstep space for the younger children, so in 2 courtyards and on the south site on the southern boundary. And then the children are older would have the facilities of the Rotary playing fields to utilise, which is absolutely fine and acceptable.
Yes. So come holiday time, when parents are at work, the children want to go and use that. The ones on the south side have got 2 tricky roads to cross. The ones on the island side have got to negotiate the crossing at the bottom of Russell Hill. 8, 9, 10-year-olds. I wouldn't wish one of my children to have used that.
Was that a question?
Yes. Would you have wished one of your children to?
Well, there's a pedestrian crossing point, and I think my child would be more than capable to push the button and then wait for traffic to stop and walk across. I think and this is for the older children as well. So I think it's an acceptable arrangement.
Yeah, I think as an architect who's always been interested in social housing, and I'm sure equally you are, I would say to you that this is a major concern for parents to know that their children are going right the way down to the Rotary Field, which is half a mile away.
It's about 500 metres.
Right, yes, so a metre there and back. Yeah. So my question to you is, do you not see this a weakness for the provision of play for the children?
No, not at all. I think we've got the outside play spaces identified for the younger children. There's also a lot of landscaping and areas around that they can the older children can relax. But don't forget, although there's a playing field 500 metres down the road, there's literally the community facilities here which they can also utilise. So there's nothing stopping the children of the tower coming down straight into the basement and using that. So if anything, this is probably one of the developments with the most amount of facilities that could be used by residents.
You're right. Would they be able to go down there and kick a ball around?
Yeah, within a certain area, the downstairs hall, the basement sports hall, they could certainly use that. I mean, that's the point of it.
Right. 5-a-side? 11-a-side?
Definitely not 11-a-side.
Quite. So it's a limited area.
But if you were going to have an 11-a-side pitch, that would be larger than the island site and the south side entirely. It seems.
Yes, I'm not suggesting you provide a football pitch. You got any more? Thank you.
Good morning. I'm referring to section 8.6, where you mentioned growth and regeneration. The residents were promised regeneration would occur when the Tesco superstore was built. So what, in your opinion, makes a 17-storey building unique that a smaller development can't provide?
What makes it unique in terms of regeneration potential?
And the effective size of the development. What can you do with a 17-storey building for development that can't be achieved with a smaller one?
It's a difficult question to answer, really, because there's not another scheme of fund to me. But this development certainly will, in a physical term, literally regenerate the site we're sitting on. It'll be immensely improved. In terms of the social impact, obviously a larger development will have a much greater impact. So you've got 5 floors of accommodation, of community accommodation, which could all be utilised. If you're going to have a much smaller, and this is very much rehearsing almost, or repeating what was sort of made yesterday with Mr. Pearson, but obviously the smaller the development, the weaker the community offer, or it pushes something else out, a bit like a balloon. If you squeeze one bit, it's going to pop out the other side. So I would say that the application and the tower provides also a landmark which can be seen from afar, which, as I say, states that the town is open for business. It's a very high quality development of outstanding design, which means that the physical regeneration is of an exceptional quality. And then we've got the social aspect, which I've touched on earlier.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a few quick questions. You asked the other Mr. King the number of flats. Could you tell me how many number of flats are actually in the tower?
In the tower? Okay, so I can do some maths. I know
Why do you need to know this, Mr.
I'm just curious. I was also going to ask, are there social housing in the tower, or is that all?
We'll ask that question, that's all.
Yeah. So it was how many flats and how many of them are social in the tower?
There are 50 in the tower, sir.
50?
50.
Thank you. And how many of those are social?
There's no affordable housing in the tower element.
Thank you. And the other bit, you picked up something I said, and again, I think we would agree with you, community facilities in Purley are very important. It's a way of keeping communities together, stopping people having to travel miles to find other things. But what community facilities will be there for what I call the 11 to 16-year-olds, which is the one group that frequently get forgotten? We get lots of toddler groups, lots of small playgrounds, and when they're older they'll have their own money and the ability to go out, but it's that 11 to 16-year-old group that I have concerns with.
Absolutely. Well, I have been an 11 to 16-year-old, and the groups that are available for them are only limited by their imagination, because I think that's one thing that's probably got a bit lost over the course of the inquiry. There was talks about there's 20. There's 20 more activities, that's 20% or whatever it is. I think the point is, it's the space. And people from the community can come and use the space, and they can, within reason, not going there, they can do what they want. So if there's when I was 14, 15, I liked playing chess and computer games. I could why not come and start a computer club or a chess club? I understand you can't put an 11-a-side football pitch here, but this is open. This is open for the community to come in and use the space.
Just follows on from Mr. King. So it doesn't stop, 5-a-side or 6-a-side football in this community facility, because my experience is a lot of, particularly boys and some girls these days, between 11 and 16, do like to kick a ball around.
Yeah, so that can still be done. As I say, it's not an 11-a-side or 5-a-side pitch, but there's certainly room to kick a ball about. There's not just games that involve those pitches. There's all sorts of different things that kids can do with football to keep themselves occupied and off the streets, and I'm sure they will do that because the spaces are there for them.
Thank you for that. The other two bits concern the tower itself, and you said there is some detrimental effect on the listed buildings, but in particular our concern is on 960 Brighton Road, and particularly when you visualise that from the A22 coming from Purley Station. Our concern is that the tower will actually detract from the visual impact of 960.
So
I'm happy, Mr. White, to answer that, but remembering Mr. Lacavara has given evidence on that, sir, specifically, and I'm more than happy as a general planning comment has given, but...
yes, I was going to sort of highlight that. I mean, a lot of things seem to have been covered already, but obviously Mr. Lacavara did comment on that, and he described there as being some modest harm to that building. Has a slightly different level of balancing or weighing compared to the listed buildings. So with the non-designated heritage assets, it's a balanced judgment in terms of the scale of harm and loss in relation to the significance of the heritage asset. He has come to that point of view that he's happy with the scheme in relation to that the scheme is acceptable, and I'm in agreement with that.
Right. My last point, again, I agree with you that overall the scheme is innovative, high quality, good design, but it could have been the same without a 17-storey building.
It's impossible to answer some of these questions because it might not also have been high quality if it was lower. I don't know what these plans are in front of me that I haven't seen. But yeah, you can get lower buildings that are also of high quality. Whether that they would be a landmark or not is a matter for debate when you've got those plans in front of you.
Yeah. And my last point is a landmark building doesn't have to be a tall building of 17 storeys. It could be a 2-storey building because there are many 2-storey buildings in London that are landmarks.
This is true, but we feel in this situation the 17-storey building is a landmark.
Okay, thank you.
It certainly is.
Any other questions from those opposed to the scheme? Right, I've just a few questions myself, and I'm afraid they're not in a sensible order.
That's okay.
That's how it goes. First one, following on from the air quality evidence, you've talked about the sense of place and the advantages of public realm, particularly thinking about Russell Hill Road.
Yeah.
The large space that would be created there would be created in an area with particularly poor air quality. Have you taken that into account?
Yes, I mean there is I would say it's a gathering space. It's not large enough for people to. Well, it is of a good size, but it's a space where people will meet before going into the community centre. So more of a transitional public space rather than one you would sit for long periods of time.
Okay, thank you. We'll come on to it in a minute, but the affordable housing review mechanism that's proposed, that if it's more profitable, there'll be more greater contribution. Has the council used that before, and what success has it had?
It has been used before in the Croydon in the CMC, the Croydon Metropolitan Centre.
Right.
In terms of success, it's a good question. I don't know. I can certainly look into other cases. It's been used on the large Saffron Square development, which is the tall purple building that you'll see as you go past. I certainly know it's been there, and it's gone into a lot of agreements. The question is the building out of these and whether super profit has gone to affordable housing. But I can certainly...
There's two things I'm interested in. First, the mechanism and whether it's enforceable and robust and so on. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the other for sort of added comfort as to whether such a mechanism does ever deliver a contribution to affordable housing. I wondered if you could tell me about that.
Well, it would do. It would go into the council sort of pool set aside. Obviously, it would be closely monitored because it's a Section 106 amount, and it would go into delivering affordable housing. I mean, affordable housing is arguably
It would. What I'm saying is, has the mechanism been used in the past, and if it...
I don't know.
Has it ever delivered? I
don't know if it has been. I can check that out and have a note on that.
If you could let me know perhaps next week, please, that would be helpful. Yeah, no, I think we've dealt with that one. With a little prompt, the applicant's witnesses found that part of the MBBF that refers to places of worship and refers to them as community facilities. Does any part of the development plan or emerging plan refer to places of worship, and does it talk about them as community facilities or what?
I'll have to jump to the emerging policies for that. There certainly will be, that's for sure, off the top of my head.
Do you mean generally, sir, or specifically?
Well, both.
Because the site is allocated for a new church. The site is allocated for a new church. This
Right.
In the emerging plan.
Okay.
Which is going to be adopted in a few weeks' time.
Right. Okay. Well, that probably covers it.
Okay. I thought you had more general comments or policies.
Yeah. I mean, if there are more general. I didn't know that the plan was due to be adopted quite so soon, so I was sort of...
That's the hope, but the MP will probably... We're so delayed at Croydon.
My report may well go in before that date. If you could tell me either now or in due course whether in the adopted plan there are policies that refer to it. Sorry about that. Now you're going to take me on the site visit round the adjoining buildings that might be affected by overshadowing.
Yes.
My preference is to deal with it that way. If I assume the applicants will bring plans, but if you can bring, there's some information on photographs that I think that mark up potential impact. If you could take me to that, that would be helpful.
Yes, I've got the sorry.
Apologies if I missed it, but where do you deal with sun and daylight to the new flats on the south side? I'm particularly thinking the internal courtyard.
Yes, it is in there. I'll just try and dig that section out. So,
as you will know best than anyone, there's a lot of information on this.
Yeah, especially when you've got to cover all the topics.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's
the summary will have made Mr. Morgan's closing very easy.
It's probably worth pointing out, whilst I'm looking for this, that the issue was raised during the course of the planning application. So the applicants instructed their specialists to do some further testing on the lower level units in the south side, and the units which were most affected, which was the ones on the sort of the western boundary, low level, and obviously the north-facing ones on the quadrant. They increased window sizes to factor that in, and there was a 20% increase in terms of those that comply with the BRE in those areas. There obviously are some that have a lower level of light. I mean, that goes without saying with the design of the quad building, but part of the quad layout was so that they could also be protected from other issues, i.e. the transport, road layout and anything associated with that, and to have a secure, safe space in the middle as well. So it's one of these planning weigh-ups and balances. What I would point out is that if you took those ones as a percentage overall, when I don't have the percentage, and I've been proved that my maths isn't particularly great through some of these reports, there is a very, very good accommodation for future occupiers.
Thank you, that's helpful. The trees, I think I've gone through the existing trees and I've dealt with that. In relation to the proposed Scots pine, I saw there was a consultation that involved the council's amenities section. Is that right?
The council's amenities section?
Have I got that right from your committee report? Let's do it the other way around. Does the council have an arboriculturalist?
We do have an arboriculturalist, tree officer in simple language, yeah. And they did comment on the planning application. Now they commented primarily on the existing trees, particularly given the preserved trees. And I don't recall that they commented on the proposed trees. Obviously, they noted that the new trees would mitigate the loss of the previous trees, but in terms of them going in, they didn't have comments. Of course, many of the new trees would be on highway land and would be a responsibility for TfL. So in reference to your trees on the top, the main document that talks about those is in the additional note that was done in the wind assessment.
Sorry, in the
wind assessment, the addendum to the wind assessment, where the assessor felt on his balanced judgment that they would be fine, but obviously that would need to be looked at the detailed design stage, and obviously we've got conditions that look to permanently secure those trees to the top. I think that's where you may have been going with your question. Sorry, I sort of jumped around a bit there.
It is, yeah, no, that's helpful. Another one to do with the council's experience, the proposed ventilation system to deal with air quality, does the council have experience of that being installed elsewhere, and is it successful? Are the filters regularly changed and things?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, Mr. Simmons probably would have been the better position, but of course. When
I wrote these questions,
I know you did say they were in there.
There we go.
But they could be conditioned to have maintenance included within them.
Yeah, I think it is in the condition, but
whether it's actually enforceable.
Has the council got the resources to check that the filters are changed how often?
I suspect if there was a complaint, we'd go out and have a look. But we do have resources, but I'm not sure. Again, it would probably be for the enforcement team or the environmental team to check that.
Indeed. Okay.
It would be difficult for us to proactively check conditions.
I've raised it. Parking permits will come on to the obligation on that and the case law and the difficulties over that. But again, what's the council's experience in enforcing restrictions on car parking permits?
As far as I'm aware, they have been successful, and this is through talking to the one of the highway officers, Mr. Wakeling, in Mr. Burton's team, who's sort of responsible for these. So when there's an application for a permit, they obviously cross-reference the data with the buildings that have been restricted, and obviously they decline the permit, and that's so there's a bit of joined up, linked in the thinking there. It does happen.
Final question. In the officer report, which I take it's your report.
Well, technically it's the director's report.
Oh, right, okay.
But yes, I wrote it.
there we go. The resolution was to grant it subject to 14 obligations, is my note. Are they all included? It was, it's core document 6.1 and it's paragraph 4.1.
4.1. Let me just have a quick look through. Yeah, so there's one there, that's the financial contribution for the maintenance of street trees.
Right.
That's not in the section 106, but of course that would, as I explained, because the street trees are owned by TfL, or the highways I should say, and there's a section 278 reference in there with a definition which refers to the requirement of street trees, that can all be roped into the section 278. So it is in there, but not explicitly.
But otherwise, the other 13 are explicit?
Yes.
Thank you, that's extremely helpful.
No worries.
Mr. Morgan, any re-examination?
Can I just deal with a couple of matters, please,
Yep, of course you may.
Thank you. Firstly, Mr. D. King, if I get my names right, in relation to what he asked you, his concern about amenity space. You've dealt very largely with that, but just help us, though, for the inspector's record largely. If you go to your proof of evidence, paragraph 731, I think it is. Well, you're under the heading of mixed there, do you see that? It's bottom of page 20, or 731.
Oh, 31, sorry.
731, page 20, you're dealing with your assessment against the adopted plan, do you remember that?
Yep.
And refer to the mix here, and then just see the sentence beginning at the bottom of the page. In view of the site's central location adjacent to a complex and busy road network and with the limited opportunities to provide high levels of on-site communal amenity space and extensive play areas, it is considered the location and development is not suited to higher levels of 3-bed units. Do you see that?
I do.
And then you've explained clearly what facilities are available. Just simply wanted to ask you to assist. What's the relevance of the mix in terms of the amenity provision?
Well, the larger the mix of 3 beds, you're going to have more children generated. So keeping that down, there would be less child yield and therefore less requirement for the space. So the application would cater for that.
Thank you. And the second matter related to any mention of religious facilities, churches in the plan. I think you might be checking that, but can we, you may not need to go to it, but in proposal 35, which site does proposal 35 relate to?
So,
Do you have it there?
yeah, so it's the island site.
So you clear what I'm referring to, I'm sure,
Yeah.
in the emerging local plan, CLP2, 35. In terms of that proposal, do you have that in front of you?
What's the core document again, please?
So it's CD11,
Yeah,
and I think it's 11.2, the one I'm looking at. Yeah,
yeah, that sounds right.
that's the CLP2.
Yeah.
So what page is that on?
It's not got a page actually.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I'm
Thank
afraid
you.
I'm old school here. I'm on the Steam version here at the moment. And in mine, it's just proposal 35. So I think you got the electronic as well. So
I have.
I mean, but for those who haven't, it's 5 pages or so after page 257 in the old school copy.
I'm going to have to go old school because I can't find it on my electronic version. I've got a slightly different electronic version.
Well, I know it's come up, but I think it'd be quite useful just to remind ourselves of what's it.
So on. Oh dear. On page 118, I've got paragraph 6143.
It's 218, sir.
Thank you. I'm mishearing. I think it's the crackle.
I think it's the crackling, yes.
Yeah.
Someone.
Yeah, I should have just searched it, shouldn't I? Okay.
Are you with us, Mr. White? Is he get? Oh, right. Okay.
Right. So 218.
So I hope you'll see on 218.
11.127.
Well, mine is 35 Purley Baptist Church, 2 to 12 Banstead Road. It's the actual proposal, site proposal.
Yeah. No, I've got. It's understood at 218. So what?
Well, I'm just,
I think it's 215.
250.
oh, that's embarrassing.
Yeah, got it at last. Yeah, got it at last.
Thank you, sir. Are you with us, Mr. White?
215 I've
with
got.
me. And
Yeah, 215 it is.
just remind ourselves, if you go to over the page in mine, description of option, mixed-use redevelopment comprising new church, do you see that? Community facility and residential.
Yep.
And if we see the justification for the option, redevelopment of the site could help to meet the new homes in the borough. Church and community facility are protected by Croydon Local Plan Policy SP5. Are you familiar with that policy?
I am familiar with that policy. I haven't got that on my system. I'm not quite sure what's...
Well, you haven't got it there?
No.
Okay, well, I won't ask you about it, so I'll just refer you to that.
Let me just check that I've got everything I should have. I've got
Of-
page 215, I've got proposal 35.
It's of the Croydon local plan, and it's CD10-1.
Ah, hang on. Right, so I was still in 11.2. So CD10.1.
Amanda, could you get the...
So it's CD10.1,
Yeah. And the
and it's, for your note, it's SP5, and paragraph 539. I won't go to it now, but just for your note, because it refers to a wide range of faith groups. This is under the section on...
CD 10.1 is in the ladies' benefit.
Yeah, it's the adopted...
has a wide range of faith groups, many of which for demographic.
Volume 5 of the hard copies, yeah.
Yeah, I've got 539.
Just for your note, so I won't take up the point there, but there's a specific reference to faith groups there, because that's referred to in the emerging local plan, which I just took you to.
Right. But does it express support for
I beg your
them or
pardon?
refer to them as community
Yeah.
facilities?
Exactly.
Right, oh, okay. That's the heading above. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry it was later, but I thought you ought to have it. So. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. White. So that completes our evidence, I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so two remaining things to deal with this week are an initial look at the conditions and the 106. Do people want to take a break or look at them now?
Well, we're not going to do them in 12 minutes.
We're not going to... No.
Now, short break.
Shall we have a
Shall
short
we reduce break?
Shall we have a half-hour lunch break, something like that?
Yes.
Why don't you make it 1:30? How about that, sir?
40 minutes. That sounds admirable. We'll adjourn until 1:30.
Thank you, sir.